Hello and welcome back, everyone. And today I am happily joined by my friends over at the Challenge Fandom podcast to talk about a certain topic, I would say like a hot button issue now on the challenge. And that is, which spinoffs count? Should spinoffs count? And I thought nobody would be better to talk about this than the Challenge Fandom podcast, who I would deem challenge experts at this point. Welcome to the channel. How you doing?
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be on. We're doing good. How about yourself, man?
Yeah.
Doing pretty well. I'm actually very excited to talk about this because doing the research and also knowing my own biases, I want to know somebody else's thoughts on this because it's really interesting because I think since like 2018, up to 2018, there was only like 4 spinoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it just seems like we've been on spinoff overload. We've had like the Spring Break Challenge back in the day. We have 3 Champs Versus series. Now we have 3/4 All-Stars seasons. 4th one is coming up. And then we have 5/6 global spinoff series. That totals to 12 that have been premiered as of recording and doing this interview. 14 in total as of going through pre-production, production, and everything going on. If we're taking a look at just from the main series of being 38 to 39 seasons of that main series, that's about 36% is spinoffs, with 14 divided by 38. So a lot of people are wondering or bringing this up now that the spinoffs seem like there's no end in sight. Should spinoffs count to a challenger's resume? If they win a spinoff, does it get put into their challenge championship title resume, or are they completely separate? Should they even count, or is it just a fun fodder for their resumes? What is your thought process of the spinoffs, and how do you guys view them?
Honestly, first of all, I love this topic, especially with what just happened on Worlds. It is a massive discussion topic that I've seen around the fandom a lot is, should this win for Jordan count? Should the one for Wes on All-Stars 3 count? I struggle with this because I think some of them count and then some of them don't. For example, like the Champs vs. Stars, Champs vs. Pros, typically I don't count those. I feel like they're very different from what the challenge is supposed to be. Whereas I feel like All-Stars is very similar to the flagship, and I tend to count those ones. I'm here for some convincing about the USA, UK, all the international spinoffs, because I'm like, I keep going back and forth with those.
Sorry, I started off in one camp in a very strong belief that the spinoffs didn't count.
Yeah.
And I didn't consider them part of the same type of challenge as the flagship. I've had a change of heart, I would say, over the last 3 to 6 months as I've seen more and more of these. At least in my opinion, there are very distinct rules that have to be met in order for it to be considered an actual challenge season. And not all of the spinoffs meet that, in my opinion. You can make a valid argument either way, but at a certain point, it's just going to get too convoluted. Like we, as a fandom, I feel like we have to come to a decision on this.
Right.
Do they either count or they don't count? Otherwise, we're going to have a whole bunch of asterisks if we ever try to break down like most wins and most daily wins. Like it's going to get really convoluted really quick.
That's a great point, because there's a distinct line between main challenge that I count for sure, definitely, and then on the other side, I just keep all the spinoffs to themselves, because in my brain, it's either all the spinoffs or no spinoffs, because there's so many stipulations I feel with some of this stuff, because I even asked it on one of my Tiny Table Talks or review and recaps after the finals of the World Championships, and some people came out and be like, well, it's all about difficulty, and I'm like, I think you could make the point or argument that all challenge seasons are difficult in their own way. People were like, I only do it for All-Stars because they're all challengers. But then you could argue that if you just step into the challenge game, just being there, you are in the challenge. We can't have too many technicalities. That's where I get lost in it. And that's where I want to break this down and see if we can come up with a decision moving forward, and maybe we'll start a trend or something.
Oh, look, and we've got our
look at Josh decided to join us.
What is your take on it, Josh? What are your thoughts on the spinoffs, and what should count and what shouldn't count? Do you even look at any of the spinoffs should count for anybody's final resumes?
We've actually been talking about this for like the last year and a half, off and on. Tony and I, or no, Corey and I got into a discussion about this as well. But, you know, in the Champs versus Stars and Champs versus Pros, you did get to see some of the challenge history, like between Wes and Bananas. I still think what Wes did by not letting him win when the guy from Johnny's Charity was there. That was kind of so. I mean, there was still some conniving. It's good to see, you know, the same people win, but again, it was for charity. They're sitting in a hotel room. All Stars, I think, definitely count. They're secluded. The finals are still hard. And World Champions, Challenge USA, I was kind of on the fence because it's all rookies. So that's where I'm stuck. So hopefully by the end of this, you can help me decide on that part.
I mean, yeah. I'm hoping we can all come up with something because I'm still in the boat of no spinoff should count. Right. They should just be like resume fodder. I will say now, like everybody's talking about All Stars and everything. Like I understand the All Star stuff. I also think though that it just feels different. It feels like a different game almost in a sense that like we've seen Kayla on the main series and only go to the finals once. Yet she makes it to the finals her first time on All Stars and gets all the way to second place and just can't cut it to get first place. The same thing with Veronica getting so far, and she hasn't been able to get that far in the more recent seasons. But that shouldn't take away from anything. This is the thing with me. Yeah. We count the main series no matter what, right?
Right.
But the challenge has gone through so many different phases and so many different seasons that it's like some people discredit the first few seasons where there was no eliminations or there was these giant teams and everybody's like, oh, well, they're just playing carnival games or something. And so if those count regardless, then pretty much all these should count. Almost at a certain point, I would think, but I'm still in the mindset that all of them need to count or none of them need to count. But I do like the rules that you're setting up moving forward that we can all agree, like if these are the like 10 set of rules that this season of the challenge follows, then it makes me feel better about being like, okay, well, I'll count this one. I'll count this one. It's when you start getting to the technicalities, that's when it's like, oh, well, I can't count this one because this game, or it's weird in that sense.
I did an AMA on the Instagram and someone asked me, what's my top 4 men? And I said, well, it's CT, Jordan, Bananas, and then depending on my mood, it's either Darrell or Wes. And they're like, well, how can you have Bananas in third, blah, blah, blah. And I go, it's just the numbers. Because if you look at it, Jordan's done, 9 seasons when you include All-Star 3s?
If you include All-Stars, he's 4 for 9. If you don't include All-Stars, he's 4 for 8.
So when we're trying to compare and contrast players, the easiest way to do it is, well, let's look at their numbers because that's the only non-objective theme there is.
Non-biased, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But to me, I can't take those wins away from people in eliminations or in dailies. And so in fact, I can't take their Johnny's 2 wins away. You know what I mean?
Or Wes's.
Or Wes's, I give it to him as his third win.
Yeah, I look at it kind of how you would look at, like fan series, like animes or Star Wars or Marvel or something. Like, is it canon? Was it made by the same people, right? And so that's what gets me with the spinoffs is All Stars and all these internationals. They were all made by Bunham and Murray. They're all, living in a house playing the challenge. And for me, the challenge isn't necessarily about people. It's about the game. Are you playing the dailies, running the final, doing the eliminations, playing the social game, living together? Those are kind of my criteria for whether or not I consider a challenge to be true, quote unquote canon.
The feeling for me is they all live in a house together. They're all playing dailies. TJ was a host for a majority of these, so that all plays into the canon argument.
TJ's a big one for me too. If TJ's not there, I'm like, nah. That's why like Champs vs. Stars Pro thing was automatically out. I was like, TJ's not hosting it? No. This is not official.
And the thing with me, well, I'm going to be honest.
I love you, Josh.
It's awesome.
I love the Miz, but I love him for after shows. Here's my thing is like, I remember the season that Riff Raff was on and he just like disappeared and like went clubbing or did whatever and showed up with sunglasses at like the deliberation.
You can't do that.
That's not a real challenge. Come on.
I think what we agree here is that we're all open to the idea of these spinoffs or some of these spinoffs counting. We just need to come up with like, what is the essence, I guess, or what are the natural attributes that make the challenge, and kind of put those to the spin-off series to see if they hit the threshold of where it can lead to them counting. Again, with these rules, you don't want the stipulations of being like, well, this season hits 3 of 6 rules, so I guess it counts. It almost feels like you have to make like a certain number of rules to where, yes, this is definitively like it counts.
I think we can boil it down pretty quick. I mean, to be honest, because if you really look at it, the essence of the challenge, and yes, the first few seasons are different because they're exploring an uncharted road and they're paving their own path as they're going to figure out what they are. So
very true.
Now these won't apply to those, but if we look at the large amount of work that is the challenge, let's say really from season 10 to now, we have a good idea of what those guidelines should be. So you have to live in a house together.
Right.
You have to live in a house together. It could be 2 houses where you have 2 different groups, but it has to be communal living.
Right. I agree with
I think that is a major. You have to have dailies, and then you have to have a vote and elimination.
Right.
Nomination and elimination. You have to have those.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And then
a final.
Well, of course, a final. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we don't stick to the formatting of it, then it's Survivor or it's Big Brother. I mean, because they all have their rules that make it that game.
Well, and that's kind of my other question too, and that leads into as far as like the cast, right? Because I know you and I, Rick, we've had this debate quite a bit about, you like to use the term, like playing in a vacuum. Like if there's, for example, like USA, there were no MTV players there or whatever. Mm-hmm. So how do we combat that, or are you letting that argument go? Because me personally, for me, the challenge isn't necessarily about the people. It's about the actual game. And so I don't really care who's cast on it. I like seeing MTV players come back and challenge the newer people. But me personally, like, I don't mind new people coming on. I don't mind, the MTV people, the same MTV people not being on it. Like, who's on the cast, if that affects whether or not it counts or not.
I don't think you can have a cast requirement.
The only stipulation I would think for the cast would be that if the cast were to appear on another season or having a reoccurring member from said cast. So like people can say like USA doesn't count, but because we got them on another challenge season, like the World Championships with Danny, Ben, Kaz, I think that opens it up that it's not like, oh, we'll never see these people again. Because I think that's where the friction comes in. What brings some validation is that Danny did play on a second season with a ton of MTV challengers, and the same thing with Kaz and everything. So I feel like the stipulation could be it has to have a reoccurring cast member, maybe not on the initial season that they were playing on, but we have to see a player from that season again. Not saying that because we see Lolo Jones in 36 means that we have to count champs versus pros or anything like that. Right. But to me, a reoccurring cast member from a different season of the show is like a staple in my mind for some reason. Like we've barely ever had a full just like reset on the show. Even with a lot of the rumored cast list for 39, even though there a lot of people are saying like, oh, there's not going to be a ton of champions, like everybody's named, but winners, we have seen those players before.
I actually really like your point about the returning cast members. I think that's actually a great point. In my opinion, that actually is a major component of the challenge, because if you look at these competition reality-based shows, Survivor, Big Brother, Amazing Race, the challenge is the only one that consistently brings people back every single season. It's what sets the challenge apart from shows like Survivor, from shows like Big Brother. It actually kind of is a huge component of the challenge to have returning players there. I like that.
I feel like we've got 3 rules. I think we've got it has to be communal living in one house, not a hotel.
Yep.
Has to have all the structure of the challenge: daily, deliberation, elimination, final. Right. Has to have returning cast members.
Yeah, at least a couple.
Because like Drew said, we've never seen an all rookie season. You have to have former challengers. Even if they've only done one season, they have to be a returning player.
So I think we're moving towards a certain place that I feel like we can lock in. The only thing I will say is with the rule number 2 that we're talking about, with the dailies and the eliminations, the only thorn that is in the side of all of these rules sits right there in season 16 the island.
Can we make a rule that the island just isn't a challenge season?
We just pretend that never happened.
Johnny's really only got 6 wins.
That's
Derek only has 2.
I know. That's cold.
I'm just
It's a tough argument. But I have noticed that a lot of fans honestly don't count the island anyway. It's like, yeah, okay, Johnny won, whatever.
I think you bring up a good point that the only thing that the island that anybody really counts from it is the wins. Like
Right.
it's the one that Paula got screwed on. It's the one that Bananas first win. No, the face-offs I don't ever think, or at least I don't count them as like daily wins or anything like that. If you win against somebody in a vote, nobody really counts that as an elimination win.
it's that one outlier that doesn't count. So you're just like, well, I'm just going to count the winners, so that way there's no continuity issues in my
Right.
thought. What are we going to start doing if we don't accept a rule of this either counts or not? We're going to have all these segmented versions, like, oh, Danny's like a spin-off champ.
And that's what I meant.
Jordan's
Like, how do we move forward if we decide not to count the spinoffs? Then like how do we move forward with Jordan being like a flagship GOAT and then winning just for me it's too much. So like my brain's like just count them all because I can't handle all of this.
I got a point for the Challenge USA. You had Danny is the winner, Danny and Sarah, and then they're both on Challenge World Champs. They're both in that final, and they're both going against tough teams. So that's how, or the reason why I would count it.
But then do you also count Argentina, Australia, and UK?
You have to count that because are you not counting that as a season for the veterans? Like
What? Count what? What are you talking
World
about?
Championship. Like that's a season for Bananas. That's
I
a
count.
season for Tori. Like there's no difference in the way they were playing that game compared to how they were playing the flagship for the most part.
Right. I feel like a lot of people have this idea of if it's not on MTV, it's not flagship. Well, what are we going to do in a year or two when MTV's not airing it anymore and it moves to CBS? Then is it okay if it airs live on CBS, it counts, but if it's on Paramount, it's a spinoff? Like for me, it's just kind of like if it's made by Bunim and Murray, hosted by TJ, it has returning players, they all live in the house, those kind of things that we've kind of talked about. For me, I'm like, yeah, it counts, but that's just me personally.
I do like the idea of the Bunim Murray tagline on it, even though that they can have different producers on the seasons. I think that it's important that their stamp is on there because we can't align with the MTV stuff. I mean, we just can't. We can't because, like you said, I have a feeling that we could be seeing the challenge after like season 40. Having all these spinoffs and even the main season going towards CBS and Paramount Plus, more so than it maybe even staying on there on MTV. I think that the Bunim Murray tagline is strong. We can't discredit any of the global spinoffs if we're going to count the World Championship. In my opinion, they're all
That's
synchronized at one point. They're all synchronized. So I'm at the point where I'm on the fence now about All-Stars and the global series as locking into the championship stuff. But the other spinoffs, I'm kind of like, that already set sailed in my brain that they're just going to be fodder. Like I can't give CT his other 2 wins from these other seasons. I would have to just say that he won Champs versus Stars 1 and 2, but I can't like say he's a 7-time champ at this point.
And why you brought that up about Champs versus Stars, I know Champs versus Pros, and you mentioned this earlier. I think another very important point is you have to be able to win money for yourself. It's much different when you're competing to donate compared to when you're competing to put into your bank account.
Yes.
And that's been proven. If we don't believe that, look at what Johnny Bananas did to Sarah Wright. Like he stole from her because it was for his bank account. He wasn't doing that if it was for charity.
No, I agree.
And so I think
I agree. I don't think that people put in as much effort, like, on that season as they would have put if that was prize money going into their pocket.
Yeah, we got like 5 rules so far, and I feel like they're all solid. I don't want to like muddy up the waters too much by adding too many rules, and then that's when we get into the thing of like, okay, now we're teetering on certain aspects. But this kind of, I feel like, opens up the door, even in my mind, of like, this is exactly, I think, what the challenge is at the end of the day. Like, if I had to boil it down into 5 bullet points to tell somebody who's never seen it, like, these are the aspects of the format I think I would I would be saying to them. Maybe I wouldn't like kick off by being like, well, it's a Buna Murray production, because that's just weird to say like to somebody like who, like what?
They're like, what? Well, and it's like you open something Marvel and it doesn't have like Stan Lee, like you're like, okay, this doesn't feel right, you know. So it's got to have that mark of the originality, in my opinion.
But
that's
at
what
a
I'm
certain
saying.
point, like I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Akira Toriyama, I believe is how you pronounce it. I might be off. One day he will pass away, and Dragon Ball will live on past him.
No, I totally understand that.
So to me, like there could be a change of production company, but if you still have the same rules of there's a daily, a deliberation, and elimination, there is communal living in the house together, and there is a final. Like if you still hit those rules, even with and you won money, even if it wasn't Buna Murray, I still might consider it canon, because Buna Murray is not guaranteed to be around forever. But this show could be, the format of it is a fairly common format if you really look at it. Except most production houses, they change it from voting out instead of getting eliminated. You get voted out. Where they bring it on to another step of you have to take this person out in an elimination.
Right.
And so if you have that structure,
no, that's fair though.
I think you could count it as a season, because
I was more just talking up to this point, not in the future, just like up to this point and kind of setting the precedent for the spinoffs. You know, like they were all made by Buna Murray. It wasn't like, you know, another production company came around and was like, ooh, we're going to steal this idea and change the name a little bit and make a new one. Like that kind of was just like the separation I was making, is that it's still made by the same people. And that was the big thing for me on USA.
Yeah.
You bring up a great point about Buna Murray. I mean, I think it'll live on just because they were the ones that created it initially. And even if it were to go off, I feel like they would still give it that credit at the end, even if they change names or anything, like all production companies do. But when saying, I wouldn't necessarily tell that to somebody of the challenge, of what is a distinct personality or trait of the challenge. I don't think I would say that to somebody. So I can understand that point. But at the end of the day, we still have 4/5 rules that I think boiled the challenge down to live in a house together. I would separate dailies and eliminations, or some reoccurring characters, and then winning money for yourself. I thought is a pretty good rule to also put out there.
I agree,
because that is the main thing. Even though that some people are now just handing out money like it's freaking candy, like they're Willy Wonka or something. It's like, I think it is important because they're still winning money, and then they're doing whatever they want with it after they win it themselves. Kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are we good with just these 4 or 5 rules? Because I feel like we're at a sweet spot of 4 to 5 rules that I feel like we can start putting this to the other spinoffs and then kind of definitively saying like these count.
Yeah, I agree, because I think, like you said earlier, you know, if we go beyond like 4 or 5 rules, then it kind of starts to get like diluted, and then it becomes questionable as far as, well, what does this mean to one person versus another person? You know, like I feel like what we have, it's very cut and dry. It's things you can you can look at and not be biased about. It's stats and numbers and facts, you know, and I think that that's kind of like the area you have to stay in when trying to decide whether or not a win counts.
My rule of thumb would be if you can apply 4 out of the 5 rules, it counts. Because even if you look at previous seasons, like The Island, if we're not going to admit it, it still followed, you know,
majority other than actual physical eliminations.
Yeah, there was still prize money. There was Buna Murray. You know, there was communal living.
They did have a house on the beach that they all lived in. You know, so I mean, that kind of returning players.
So by the discussion or think tank, the challenge think tank between the Challenge Fandom podcast and Angel Cake Entertainment, we have come up with a system of 5 rules of being able to distinguish if a season should count towards a challenger's resume. The rules that we have agreed upon is 1, they all have to live inside the house together. 2, there has to be a daily challenge or challenges. 3, there has to be an elimination. For reoccurring characters, we did not put a specific percentage because then it gets all muddy. So we'll just say reoccurring characters. 5, winning money for yourself, and then like a bonus optional rule of Buna Murray if in the future it's no longer. But Buna Murray has to be the production company of said season to count. If that is the case, then we are declaring here right now, if we all agree that those are the rules that should be followed and should count for deeming whether a spinoff or a challenge season should count, then that would deem All-Stars 3/4, the global series 5/6 seasons, all would count. So that means every daily challenge, every elimination, every win that all these players got out of those like 10 seasons, all would count towards them. So that means that we are declaring that John Nay is a 2-time challenge champ, Wes is a 3-time challenge champ, and Jordan is a 4-time challenge champ, if I'm remembering that correctly. And not saying that that's limited to them. I'm just declaring it that these are what we are saying. So do we agree? Does everybody agree with that final announcement?
Yeah, I'm ready to put my hand on the Bible and all of that. Let's do this. No, I mean, I think it just, honestly, Drew, I think it makes sense. It creates a system in place, to actually take count of what we're watching instead of having the million different spinoffs. Like, oh, they're an all-star champ, but they're not a spinoff USA World Championship champ,
And it leaves room for growth in the future as well, for whatever direction the challenge may go. And I think that that's important as well, because without growth, we may not have our favorite show anymore. And so I think it's important to leave that growth there for if these spinoffs turn into flagship. We don't know. Like
I said, there's going to be 10 of these spinoffs now. If we're counting, now that we are counting All-Stars and the global series, now that there's 10, I mean, just comparing that to how many seasons that the main season has, I mean, that's a quarter. That's a quarter of, and that's significant, especially if we're getting crossover from all these other players from either the USA, the global spinoffs, or even just the main challenge spinoffs coming onto it. So I think that it's not significant. It's not like a one-off. There's 3 spinoff seasons and we can count them or not. It's like we're getting 10 at this point. I feel way more comfortable now viewing these spinoffs, because I know there was a lot of discourse even in my own comment section. Now moving forward and having these set of rules, at least I know that I will be following them, because I believe in this. I actually believe in what we were able to accomplish here. I think that we did some pretty incredible stuff here. I feel like my heart has grown 3 sizes too large. I really, really appreciate everybody for being here and talking this out with me, because I was feeling like the Grinch. I'm not going to lie. I was feeling like the Grinch at certain points, being like, none of them count. You count all of them, then you got to count Spring Break Challenge. And you can't say you can count it. But now I feel much better about this. I appreciate it.
I was going to say, Drew, come back for one of our episodes and the heart will shrink real quick again. So.
We'll never be invited back on.
Yeah, exactly. So we're getting ready to do some discussion threads soon. So we're going to have just nothing but debates on who's the greatest rookie of all time. No, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think we put a nice bow on it, something that can move forward in the future, a guideline almost. Now, I don't expect everyone to want to do this, but it's how I'm going to view it. So
I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Rick and Karina, for being here on the channel and getting to talk with me about this. This was really, really fun. Where can people find you and your fantastic podcast?
So I mean, we're pretty much everywhere. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, pretty much any podcast platform. If you guys want to come follow us on social media, Instagram is @ChallengeFandomPod. Same with TikTok. We're actually new on TikTok. So if you guys are out there and listening, come follow us on TikTok. We've been having a ton of fun over there. But we do all kinds of fun content on our Instagram, like in challenge history throwbacks, fun hypothetical games and hypothetical seasons we make and all kinds of stuff like that. So just come follow us. And then I think Twitter, it's @challenge_fan or something like that.
Don't follow us on Twitter. Ain't nothing happening.
Rick runs the Twitter and he doesn't like it.
It's a lawless land.
Yeah, and y'all are doing a fantastic job over on your podcast. You guys are doing reviews and recaps, round tables. You're bringing on guests constantly, interviews. with players like CT, Tori, and Corey, and fun listen to. You guys go in depth, which is incredible. So I highly recommend everybody checking out the Challenge Fandom podcast. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Drew. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a great
Thank
time.
you, Drew.